Hi, it's Maria, and I'm doing another Forgiveness to Love. Oh my goodness. Forgiveness to Love video. Where my life is exposed here. And so today, this is part 31. And today the subtitle is page 14 of my forgiveness list, which includes doctors, MRI, August deaths, and Greyhound. And so on a more practical level, I wanted to add to part 27, where I told you about my experience with some medical professionals and radiologists in particular, and where I omitted some information. And so please believe me when I tell you I am not picking on any particular medical specialty, because to my extreme disappointment, I found the behavior across the board. And so I trust that all my ancestors who are physicians, are loath to participate in the kind of trickery and the dishonesty that I noticed. And so I'm just the messenger, I am just telling you what I experienced and what I was just so shocked to understand. And I don't really have an explanation for it, actually. But what do we do when we have chest pain, right? And cysts in our abdomen from systematic and repeated poisonings? Well, that was my dilemma. I didn't know what to do about that. And so I sought medical care in 3 different states. And what I noticed is the results of lab work and scans were false. And they were to hide conditions that we need treatment for, that we may need treatment for to save our life. And so I can't say that that I know why this is happening. However, because every other profession has been affected in terms of my communication with them because of my family. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is how does my family have so much clout to affect medical professionals and their behavior in various states. But then I remember I was also told that no attorney would represent me as well. And then I was told that Social Security is not going to give me my survivor benefits. And, as long as my family disallows that. And so anyway, it's just become too much. And yet, and our health is in jeopardy, our financial stability, obviously. I mean, they took my home, right, and everything in it. And so how do people get away with this? But I think the message here is that what happens to me, again, is reflective of what is happening out in the world. I just happen to be an extreme case. And so these are different issues that I have experienced. And so I am bringing them to light so that you can better understand if you should have any such issues in your life as well. A couple of months ago, I went to an ER, actually, and I told you that I came to Florida from California. And so I'm here because I wanted to straighten out some things with my family trust. And so I came here, and I was having some serious chest pain. And, I've had it on and off for a few years now. And each time I would see the cardiologist, they'd say, oh, you're fine, don't worry about it. Oh, you look like you're in great shape. Oh, nothing to worry about. Well, anyway, it seems to have progressed somewhat. And I also hear that, that my family is like into dark magic and stuff, and sending, like heart issues and things like that. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I'm just letting you know that that's kind of some background. So we do have, many of us do have people in our lives who really aren't playing with a full deck. I mean, otherwise they just wouldn't even imagine to do such horrible things, because but you know, darkness wants to hurt, harm, and destroy. And we can see by just looking around on the planet, we see that darkness has taken hold of many individuals, and people are acting in ways that even they, I think if they sat back and thought about how their behavior has shifted, they wouldn't even believe just how, just to what depth that they have lowered themselves to, really. And so anyway, as I've tried to say so many times now, I went to an ER in Tarpon Springs, Florida, and I had chest pain, and they didn't even check my blood. And my primary care was that I finally had an appointment with, because I needed a new primary care because now I'm in a different state. And he said, I can't even believe that they didn't even check your blood. And they connected some leads, you know, as if to check my heart for about a minute, and then said, oh, you're fine. And yet in the discharge papers, they wouldn't even write that. They wrote that the results were pending. And so I assume that those results were going to get lost in the shuffle. And so anyway, we'll see. I've not yet received those results. But so with no treatment really in that ER, and the ER was basically empty when I got there, they actually reprimanded me, and they told me that ERs are only for emergency conditions. And apparently chest pain, you know, radiating down your arms and your shoulders and your arms and your hands, just didn't cut it. That wasn't emergency enough. Anyway, they gave me one wrist splint and told me to call an orthopedic surgeon, which I thought was rather interesting. If you'll, I beg your pardon. Thank you. I just needed a sip. So I guess it's no surprise that because many of you who know my story, I absolutely believe that sibling actually did away with my father in a Clearwater hospital, and then with my mother in a Clearwater memory facility. It was kind of like an Alzheimer's cottage, different levels depending on the severity of the issue. And so she was there. And so sabotaging my medical care, you know, was just par for the course, right? I mean, if you get rid of two parents and you have one sibling left, you might as well get rid of her, right? And my family seemed to have no remorse or no conscience about destroying their own relatives. And so I think that's called murder, right? And since the ex is long gone, I was wondering why she wasn't finishing off the son, my son, and take control of the entire family fortune. But I guess the game isn't over yet. And, you know, I'm making light of it now because for so many years I couldn't even believe that this was going on. And so I realized that that whenever I would bring it up to authorities, they would basically just discount it. And I didn't know how else to draw attention to it. And so it's ludicrous, actually, that we have to find other ways of introducing a subject which is just so very painful and just so very aberrant. We need to take this seriously. These are crimes committed against humanity. And so we do not have the right, we don't have the power, we don't have the gift to have control of someone else's life. We are all in each sovereign beings. And so there is no, we're not living in a dictatorship where, you know, we have some crazy despot who is in charge of our lives, you know, who is where that would be a dictatorship. Here, we live in America, the greatest democracy on the planet, right? And so, so yes, when I sat there and I watched my sibling really destroy my mother and destroy my father, and is destroying me by this systematic poisoning. And yet, you know, I have contacted so many agencies and people and law enforcement and things like that. And you know, I think when you steal so much money, because we each had the same amount of money from an inheritance, but she took mine, and so she has double. So I guess, you know, she can basically spend mine paying people and just having them ignore me, right? And so when I say she got rid of my mother and my father, and she's been on this rampage to poison me and prevent me from medical care as she contacts physicians, and I guess, I don't know how that happens, but all I do know is that my scans have been misread, and my blood work, I don't believe, is accurate. And so how does one do that? I think it's a sad commentary on the medical profession, and yet it's not just limited to the medical profession, because it's in the business community, it's in the legal community, it's in government, it's in everywhere we turn, actually. And so when we talk about, I was thinking, well, I wonder, you know, was she going to turn on, because it was ex and sibling and son, and I wondered if she was going to turn on my son, because, you know, they say, what, there's no honor among thieves, right? And so everybody's in it for themselves. And so what's interesting is that my family just loves to plan tragedy on holidays and other memorable days. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And there's even a little town here called Holiday. And so I can only imagine that they think every day, you know, is going to be a day of torture. And here we are in the month of August. And so in the month of August, actually, my grandfather, who adored me and whom I so loved, it was my mother's father, died on August 27th of a heart attack. And he was a physician, and I guess he went to the office and then died there. And then his sister, who was my Nana, who I was so very close to, and who would stay with me in my marital home in Chicago for weeks at a time to help me with the children when I was getting ready for the divorce. Well, she suddenly and suspiciously died on the same date, August 27th. And then sibling seemed to conveniently get rid of my dad on August 27th, yes. And so she got rid of my mom on May 21st, which is my third son, Stephen's birthday. And then there was my all-time favorite, my Uncle George, who was a math professor at Notre Dame, and who I've mentioned repeatedly because he was the light of my life for many, many years. And he suddenly died due to his physician, and I don't know if it was his cardiologist or general practitioner, changing doses of his heart medication and screwing up his meds. And so he died on, he had this event, this incident, shall we say, this cardiac event on August 6th, which happens to be the ex's name day. And in the Greek culture, the name days are even more important than the birthdays. So it's Saint, you know, Saint George, Saint, you know, Saint Tom, Saint Nick, Saint Chris, Saint, you know, whatever. And so the saint days. So August 6th happened to be the saint date of the ex, whose name was Scott, but it was in a Greek name. It was Soterios. But anyway, so, and then my Uncle George ended up dying on August 7th during the thick of the divorce. And he was really someone I leaned on for my emotional support, because he was truly the closest to me and my all-time favorite. So I assumed that my sibling wanted to get rid of him because he was always there for me. And at the time, if you would have asked me, I just couldn't have imagined getting through the rest of the divorce without him. And so, so I'm not sure if it was the sibling, if it was the ex's name day that they planned, or in fact, maybe they thought he'd be hospitalized and then last until the 10th, which was sibling's husband's birthday, or the 11th, which was the ex's birthday. So I'm not sure exactly how, but anyway, he ended up passing on the 7th, on the morning of the 7th. And so here you had my mother and father, you had my Nana, my Uncle George. These were the closest people to me. The ex and siblings seemed so envious, you know, and hateful. Why I could have, you know, people in my life that loved me and that I loved. Because some people, you know, just don't even know what that feels like, or aren't capable of having those kind of relationships. And I'm not speaking about her because I don't really even know her. Well, I just know that she wasn't really a part of the family situation where we had this closely knit Greek family. She was always kind of an outsider, or at least that's how I perceived it. And so I felt very blessed to have these relationships. And I think in one of my videos I said that my Uncle George and my mom and I used to say we have a mutual admiration society, because we were just always, you know, together and talking and laughing and just, you know, we'd stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning doing jigsaw puzzles together and eating ice cream or something like that. But anyway, and it was only later that I was actually told that sibling and ex had planned on me losing everything in court during the divorce. And so the reason why they got rid of the people that were closest to me in my life were so that I wouldn't have anyone to help me, get me through, you know, this, when I needed the support system more than ever. And that, you know, I was to lose everything, including my children, which in fact, for some, in some way, they were able to accomplish that. And you wonder, my goodness, you know, I guess the president can accomplish anything he wants, but short of that, I just can't even imagine just going around and just having people expire and then controlling people's lives. I mean, as I said in my last video, I think I said it was almost as if I was to be a pet, because I had no control of my own life. Somebody else was like pulling the strings. So it was either a puppet or a marionette, you know, where they just pull the strings, and then you have no volition of your own, actually. And so here we are, you know, the full moon is a day when the crazies get even crazier, right? And so the full moon in August is on August 11th, the ex's birthday. Yes. Which seems rather fitting, because we're all experiencing so many powerful energies this month, don't you think? And they're aggressive energies, actually, from my you know, from my standpoint. What I see is I see a lot of belligerence. I see a lot of people behaving in a very bellicose fashion, actually. And it's interesting because with so many relatives that have passed, the grandfather, my nana, my father, all died on August 27th. You know, I've called to make some doctor's appointments, and you know what? No one will schedule anything, and they all tell me, well, we don't have anything until after August 27th. So I think I have a dental appointment on the 29th and a cardiologist appointment on the 30th, or the other way around. And so I'm just, maybe they don't think I'm going to make it to my appointment. I don't know. In any event, I think that would be a huge crime. But back to the medical imaging scans and reports that I wrote notes on my computer, you know, before I actually videotaped number 27. And I called that imaging center where I mentioned to you, it was in Pinellas County, and I mentioned to you that I noticed in the report that there were inconsistencies, and that certain things that I knew were a fact on my reports were missing, and even organs and cysts and things like that that no radiologist should have omitted. And so the reports were misread as well. And so I called to schedule an MRI because this was from an ultrasound when I noticed all the inconsistencies. And so I called to schedule an MRI that I needed, and what else could I do? And it was weird because the call from my phone would not go through. And so the phone showed call failed. And so I tried again, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I must have tried like 20 times over 3 days because I couldn't understand how I can dial this number, and it just kept being, like before it even kind of rang, it would hang up. So either I was blocked, or the creepo that's on my phone, he just stopped the call, you know, before it even rang there. I don't know. I could have been blocked. Yes, they could have. Someone could have told them that I was questioning the radiologist report. Anyway, so I then called from a friend's phone, and bingo, you know what, surprise, it went through just fine. So apparently, somehow, they got the message that I believe the radiologist was guilty by omission in terms of the report that related to the ultrasound that I had. And so, and then even when I hit caller ID, the call failed. So I don't really know. It's all a network, you know, of people working together saying, oh, she's dialing you. Oh, you know, don't pick up, or, oh, I'm going to drop the call, or, you know, don't talk to her, or, I don't even know. Anyway, I like to read between the lines. And so sometimes I can come up with my own interpretation, shall we say. Anyway, in Oregon, no, or I was thinking, I had this picture of OR, and I was thinking Oregon, and then I was thinking, or, yes, or the creepo on my phone actually just kind of hung up before the call actually even dialed, right? So the bottom line is that my medical care was still being blocked. And so I then called a different imaging center. And that was interesting because they told me that they only had appointments on Sundays available. And so I made one, but something about it just didn't feel right. And so I called to reschedule for a weekday. And so the girl that answered, the scheduler, she wasn't even sure that they even had Sunday appointments. So she was rather surprised why I was there, why I was going to be there on a Sunday. And so I'm thinking, God only knows, you know, what the plan was. Had I gone there on a day where I might have been the only person there. And so, anyway, and I mentioned that when I had had an MRI after the brain injury in Oregon, yes, the MRI tech had said that the MRI was finished, and yet he just kept me under. and it just kept pounding and pounding and pounding my head. And finally, you know, I yelled to the technician and I said, hey, this is really painful, stop. And so eventually he slowed it down and stopped it. But anyway, so I called a different MRI, and they said only, you know, they didn't even know that they had Sunday appointments. And so the woman put me on hold, and she never got back on. And so I never heard from them again. And so I guess it was no MRI for Maria, because Maria would scrutinize the report. And apparently my medical care was not to be scrutinized for whatever reason. We can only imagine, you know. And what was weird was then I had an appointment with my primary care doctor, who I really enjoy. And I had awakened with a sore throat that day, so I canceled the appointment. And the receptionist asked if the visit was about the MRI. And so at first I was confused, and then I wondered if the office knew that I couldn't even get an appointment with the MRI. And so, and if I needed to speak to them about that. So perhaps the MRI facility called him and said, we're not going to do an MRI on her. And so perhaps that's how they knew anything about the MRI. Anyway, yes, I guess I couldn't have an appointment once I spoke my truth. And so, and yet, if in fact it weren't true, then they would have no problem, because everything would be correct. And so I would be the one in error. And yet the fact that there were so many omissions just leads me to believe that that they realized that I realized what was going on. Anyway, to me it feels like every doctor, you know, every lab, every imaging facility I'm to see is kind of fair game for the dark. And so this is really a much bigger game than I ever imagined. And so it's kind of like when the ex told me that there was no one he couldn't get to, and I just kind of laughed it off and said, I don't believe that. And so, but it since has seemed to include, you know, every attorney, every agency, every company, every person, place, or thing. And no one was beyond the grip of wealth and corruption. And so as for the cardiologists, which I mentioned in part 27, in the 3 states, they didn't do the right tests. And if they did do the right test, there was a positive, there was an issue, and yet the cardiologist said, oh, it was a false positive, don't worry about that. And then when I repeated it, he wouldn't even let me see the results. And so then they all say, oh, you look fine, you know, you look like you work out, you're in great shape, don't worry about it. And so, and yet I'm still having chest pain. So if in fact there's this like conspiracy to block me from medical care, I can only do so much, and thus I am letting you and authorities and everyone else know that this is what's been going on. And you can believe that if it's been going on to me, it's been going on to a lot of other people, and people might not be aware because they wouldn't have had that experience, that history that I've had with knowing that the ex and the sibling and the son were deliberately blocking me in so many different ways. So it's kind of like a maze, you know, you just keep going, and then all of a sudden the door shuts, and you try another way and the door shuts. And so really that has been my experience for as far back as I can remember. And so, you know, life here on planet Earth is quite interesting. And to some degree, we do create our reality. And so, and we have a lot of past life karma that we have to clear, and the negativity in our thoughts, and the aggression of others, because perhaps our soul and their soul, perhaps we had things that we needed to to get through, right? What's the word I'm looking for? It's probably the brain injury. All of a sudden, sometimes I'm grasping for a word. But we needed to negotiate, perhaps. And so, anyway, and in terms of as I mentioned, the brain injury, where the bus door was slammed on my head, you know, I did have an MRI at an Oregon medical center. And upon my arrival, you know, this is when I was trying to tell you, I was greeted by a small, thin man who appeared to be in his 20s. And he seemed very focused and gave me the key to the locker where he told me to put all my things. And then he kind of nervously walked around this MRI room as if supervising the tech. And he stood behind the wall of protection that sectioned off that area of where the control equipment seemed to be positioned. And so he seemed to be like directing things there as well. And at some point, the tech actually said the test was finished. And I mentioned that to you just a few moments ago, but yet the banging just restarted and then actually became louder and faster than at any point during the actual test itself. And I had to call out to the tech. And so, and I was stuck in that MRI machine until he stopped it. So that leads me to believe what was actually going to happen if I went to an MRI facility on a Sunday when there was no one else there. Or perhaps there were just 2 other people there, or they were in a different area, if in fact they don't have Sunday appointments regularly scheduled. And so this all seemed very weird, and I'm thinking, my gosh, you know, I'm speechless sometimes when I actually think of the collusion after collusion and betrayal after betrayal, and criminality after criminality, and conspiracy after conspiracy. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, yet I will speak my truth. And so I had been told years ago, actually, during when I was doing some brain and spinal cord research, I had been told that I actually have a congenital vascular configuration that is, it's interesting, and it's not what one would see in the population at large. And so this is something that would be noted on an MRI. And so there was no mention of it on that MRI that I'm speaking of. And again, you know, everything is fine and it's just hunky-dory, A-okay, oh, you're good to go. But where exactly did they want me to go, right? And so was I to infer that the Greyhound steel door didn't even touch this delusional woman since everything is A-okay, fine? I don't know. I'm just talking. After all, it seemed as if they didn't assume any responsibility or fault whatsoever. And again, I was stuck with the ambulance bill that they themselves summoned. And I could virtually get no medical care. So go watch part 27, and you'll hear more of the story there. And I decided to terminate my Texas personal injury attorney when I was informed that the trial was scheduled on the sibling's birthday. And various depositions and deadlines were actually scheduled on really crazy days, like sibling's anniversary, or her son's birthday, or her husband's birthday, or other days, the ex's birthday, and other days that reminded me of the ex's holiday threats, you know, that things won't go well, that I'll experience a lot of anguish and sadness on holidays. And so anyway, it felt best just to dismiss the lawsuit, because I really I wasn't interested in pursuing any litigation actually. And so, although at one point, you know, I had been very hopeful that I could get some funds so that I could engage in some medical care, which I so desperately needed, because after this brain injury, I was stuttering and I could barely think. And it was, I think I mentioned it, but my head was like in a box. It was just like, and my ears, it was just horrible. And, you know, none of us have IQ points to spare, but I must say that I'm so grateful that, in fact, you know, I was blessed with a good brain for this lifetime. And so when I came into this lifetime, and so I am, if I didn't have the intelligence that I have, that I was born with, I might be just a blubbering idiot, actually, because it was so traumatic. And to have this steel door just smack you in the face and then throw you, and then you smack this side of your face against the steel, you know, bus. And it was just so horrible. And so, you know, because I was looking for medical care, and yet, you know, now physicians, if you don't have the proper insurance and they don't take the government insurance, then you're stuck. And so you don't get the care that you need. And so I was trying, that was the point of the litigation. And so, and also I had the Social Security survivor benefits, where there were thousands of dollars just sitting supposedly in an account, unless someone else was forging my name and thieving my identity. But they were being withheld from me until I could come up with a death certificate, right? And so I've been trying to get that for the last 5 years to no avail. And so my attorney said, you know, oh, this was great. My attorney said he had a great PI, and this was just a piece of cake. And so he could get that information for me so that I could go ahead and get the Social Security benefits. And so I sent him copies of X's information that I got on the internet and various people searches or whatever. And so, and then he forwarded to me, like, kind of like the same info, which, more importantly, there was no date of death and no certificate. So I was no better off than had I not even approached the subject with him. And so it just seemed that justice seemed to keep eluding me. And so, as you might understand, in virtually every venue, there was, the justice was just beyond my reach, really. And so I couldn't help but reflect on my journey that had been filled with, you know, people who committed horrific crimes and then obsessively lived to cover them up. And so I'll share with you a quote that, so that we can all kind of take a moment to ponder, you know, what is really going on in our world and how we are being beckoned to tell the truth. And I'll tell you, as much as I sit back and I think, why did all of this happen to me? I'm actually very grateful, because I feel that I have witnessed so much, and I have seen things that most people would never see. And I have experienced things that most people would never experience. And so the fact that I feel so blessed to have actually understood that my own family, you know, is trying to kill me, and that they killed several other family members. And because I would have never imagined. And so I think, you know, the life experience on planet Earth is all about seeing what this world is about, and understanding how people do and behave the way that they do and behave, right? And so the fact that that I went, you know, from a mansion to a homeless shelter, Now that was an incredible experience. I lived through it. I learned so much. I do believe that, you know, I was totally transformed by it. I had never even spoken to a homeless person, barely even seen one. And all of a sudden I was one. And so, you know, it's just a testament to our ability to adapt. And so when people say, oh, you know, I can't do that, or, oh, no, that's, you know, I have to have that. Well, look, honey, you know what? You don't have to have anything. And you can change, and you can learn to live like other people can live. And here's an example. Oh my gosh. You know, for years when I lived on Chicago's North Shore, I would fly to New York quite a bit. And so I'd fly for, you know, play openings and operas and things like that, and shopping. And I used to fly there every 6 weeks for, because my hairdresser was there. And I know it sounds ridiculous. I do apologize. But the reason I'm telling you this is because, you know, once I left that lifestyle, I would go to, like, you know, Supercuts or Great Cuts or whatever it is, you know, the cheapest haircut. And I knew that sibling had actually called them and would say, oh, she's, you know, this woman with black hair, she's coming in and I want you to screw up her hair. And they would. I mean, even after they'd finished cutting it. I mean, some of my other videos, if you saw my hair, you would just freak, because they would just take like this scissors and they would just like just shred my hair. And it was too late for me to say anything because there was this pile of hair on the ground. And so, you know, I was just so tired of going and having other people screw up my hair that my hair was really, there were a lot of split ends and stuff. And so it needed a trim. So I actually took this little scissors. It's like a child scissors or something. And a couple days ago, I cut my own hair. Just like that. And I thought, boy, would my hairdresser, my French hairdresser, I bet he would just have a cow if he knew that I had done my own hair. But it took me all of about 3 minutes. I just started cutting. And yeah, I mean, yes, it probably needs a lot of help. But nonetheless, at least I knew I wasn't shredding my hair. I did the best I could. And so, you know, when we are given opportunities to mingle with different people than we had normally, that had normally been in our social circle, then we are given an amazing opportunity, you know, well, you hear about teachers that are teaching now in the inner city, and you know, they hadn't lived there. They didn't have experience or exposure to those students, and yet those students are many of those students, you know, are so inquisitive and so desperate to learn. And so when we are put in situations where it's like traveling to a different country, right? And so rather than staying in the posh hotels, you know, where all the Americans stay, if you stay in the local hotels and you eat the local food and you get to know the locals, you have a whole different experience. And so, so I'm not advocating that you lose everything. I'm not advocating that, you know, you see if, you know, you have a bunch of criminals in your family who really want to do you in. No, that's not where I'm going. I am just stating that, in fact, my experience has just been so, such a 180. Well, really a 360, because well, no, it's not a 360 because I'm not going back to where I came, because, you know, we are then forever transformed. And so we can see, it's the pendulum. We can see, you know, we can drive the most expensive luxury cars or sports cars or whatever, and then we can be at a point where we're walking in flip-flops, right? Or we're riding a bicycle because that's all we have. And so, you know, and the reverse is also true, the inverse. So if in fact, you know, you were born in poverty, well, look at Oprah. And all of a sudden, look, her whole life has transformed. And so might be nicer to have done it her way rather than to have gone the other way in the other direction. And yet, you know, it's all perfect. And so it's all about the experience, because from what I've heard, planet Earth is really the only planet where we can have the full range of experiences. We can experience grief and sorrow and sadness and despair, and we can experience joy and laughter and happiness and jubilation and all these wonderful emotions. And so, and we can experience, you know, hatred and anger, and we can experience love and compassion and kindness. And so I really went off on a tangent there, but I did want to tell you that we're all here to shine brighter than we were, you know, yesterday. And every day is a new experience where we can bask in the glory of all the miracles around us. And so here's a Martin Luther King quote. I mean, I just love him. Everything he says was just so right on. Anyway, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that is so true. You know, I mean, think about it. Everything. I mean, that is just, it's beautiful. And, you know, in that vein, I just want to cover one more thing, which is just an add-on to part 27, where I talked about the medical issues. And I spoke of lithotripsy, and that's a procedure where one is given general anesthesia, and there are shock waves that are sent to shatter a kidney stone. And I guess you can do that for gallstones as well, but it was for a kidney stone. And such that the stone itself is shattered, and then it's fragmented. So then you have little fragments, you have little pieces that actually pass through the ureters and the urethras. And so they pass through, and they pass through the ureters. And so anyway, I just had this blank. That's the brain. Anyway, kidney stones, and, you know, passing a kidney stone is actually more painful than childbirth, right? And so the morning of the procedure, the urologist still hadn't gotten my blood work. And so he hadn't gotten clearance of it. And the only reason I needed clearance was because of my history of when my ex-husband had landscapers spray me with a pesticide, right? And I was drenched, and for 5 years, they thought I was going to die. Anyway, I've had to watch my pancreas, right? And so for the past 33 years, my levels, my enzyme levels have been a little off. And so, lo and behold, that on that day, for the first time in 33 years, my enzyme levels were within the normal range. And that was pretty unbelievable. And so, in fact, I was considering my overall health and how sibling and son have sabotaged it. And so I decided that I didn't really believe that lab report, but I didn't know what else to do. And so because it was okay, I mean, it was, not only was it okay, it was perfect. And so I thought that was still weird, but I decided to go ahead with the procedure. And so I underwent the procedure. I had general anesthesia, underwent the procedure. And yet the stone, which I learned, you know, a couple weeks later, was totally unaffected. And so I wondered, was this all a big joke? And were sibling and son, had they stooped to that level too, where they were going to have me have a surgical procedure, but it was a non-invasive surgical procedure, and whereby the stone shock waves were directed to, were they corrected to the correct spot? Yeah? Or were they even directed to the correct kidney? Or were they even directed to the correct organ. Oh my gosh. And what exactly was being shattered then, if in fact didn't affect the stone? So was the goal to damage a different tissues and a different organ, or was the machine just off? or I had no way of getting any answers. I knew there was some malevolent thought processes going on there in my family, but you know, there was just really nothing else I could do about that. Because it was just everybody was involved, right? The OR, the urologist, the lab, the anesthesiologist. I mean, everybody was must have seen what was going on. I just don't know. Anyway, 6 months later, I was in extreme pain, and I passed the stone, and it was not fractured. It was in its integrity. And so it all seemed so bizarre, you know, to have dealt with. I felt like I was dealing with psychopaths and narcissists, and who've done things to you right under your nose. And maybe you've dealt with people like that as well. But would they really go to that extreme with the medical procedures? But I guess there are no bounds, right, for mental illness. Anyway, right now, what I've heard is that we really are in the midst of a spiritual battle, and we're being called to choose, right? Do we want to live a life of lies and betrayal and cheating and harming others, or do we want to live a life of truth and kindness and compassion and love for one another? And do we want to blame, or do we want to forgive, right? Do we want to fear, or do we want to love? And so people are confused, and people are afraid, and they're misinformed, actually, and they don't know who to trust. And so if we were to star in a movie, I wonder what the genre would be. Do you have any guesses? I thought it would be absolutely a horror flick, and I don't watch horror flicks. Yet the truth of the matter is that we have all the answers we need within us, and the ego wants us to look outside of ourselves, and the ego wants us to be afraid, and the ego wants us to just be suspicious of everyone. Of course, you know, we may have every right to be suspicious of people based on their history. And so that's using our discernment, and we need to protect ourselves, because we're not here to be sitting ducks and let them just roll all over us, even when it appears that we are so far outnumbered, as in my case. But nonetheless, the ego still wants us to look outside of ourselves, and really, the heart is the only place to go for answers. And so the answers are right inside here, and we know what we have to do. And we either stoop to their level, or we try to bring them up to ours, and yet they have free will, so they can go where they want to go, right? And they can live whatever life they want, but they're not going to infringe on our life. And we need to speak up when we see that there's an injustice, as Martin Luther King said, an injustice, yes, an injustice is lack of justice everywhere, right? And so the ego tells us that we are smart enough. No, the ego tells us that we are not smart enough to take control of our own life. Yet that's precisely what we must do. It's time to reclaim who we are as sovereign beings. And we have the know-how, and we have the ingenuity, and we have the power to transform our life, to create what fulfills us, to live and to love. Yes. And so human beings have been giving away their power, and yet no more. It's time to call it back. And so I still want to delve more into some more things, and yet that will absolutely shock you. in terms of spells and some of the crazy things that are going on out there in order to block our free will. And so the sooner we get to part 32, the sooner you can hear about that. And I'm told this is all part of the spiritual warfare that's going on planet Earth, and that there is so much darkness to overcome. And yet this is happening as you know who you are as a divine being, right? And you can overcome all of this and more. And energy changes on a personal level before it changes on a global level. And so what we're doing is we are the light that's illuminating the darkness, always and in all ways. And so, my beautiful friends, find your strength and take back your power and look within, for therein are your gifts, right? And so join me on part 32, where you will recognize the miracles that have been around you all along. And so I wish you a beautiful day, and remember that I love you so much.